The jungle at night was never silent, but on this night, the storm drowned out even its fiercest creatures. Rain hammered the canopy, pouring down in relentless sheets that soaked the earth until it turned into thick, sucking mud. Lightning cracked across the sky, carving jagged scars of light that revealed the ghostly shapes of men moving in formation. The SEAL team advanced without a word, their movements rehearsed, their discipline absolute. Every step they took was swallowed by thunder, every breath lost to the howl of the wind. There were 8 of them, each carrying gear that weighed nearly as much as their own bodies. The storm made everything heavier. Water filled their boots, dragged at their uniforms, clung to their weapons. Still, not one man faltered. They had been trained for this, conditioned to push through pain, exhaustion, and uncertainty. The storm was not their enemy. It was their ally. As long as it raged, it masked their approach. The compound ahead had guards, guns, and walls, but in the eyes of the storm, everyone was equally blind. At the head of the team, the commander raised his fist, signaling a halt. The men froze instantly, crouching low, rifles sweeping through the darkness. A flash of lightning lit the landscape for an instant, revealing their target, a walled structure barely visible beyond the trees. Somewhere inside was the man they had come for, a high-value target whose capture could tilt the balance of operations in the region. Intelligence had been clear, and the window was narrow. Tonight was the night. The commander scanned the shadows, rain streaming down his face beneath the rim of his helmet. He couldn't hear anything beyond the storm, but he trusted his instincts. He gestured again, and the point man advanced, stepping with exaggerated care. The others followed, spreading out into practiced positions, their silhouettes melting into the storm-dark jungle. They moved like shadows, each man covering the other. The only sound was the constant drum of rain and the occasional creak of gear as it shifted under their sodden uniforms. Their radios crackled faintly with updates, barely audible over the storm. They communicated mostly with hand signals, brief gestures that carried meaning, honed through endless drills. Every man understood the stakes. The compound was close, and if the enemy discovered them too soon, the mission could end in disaster. The storm raged on, indifferent to the men below. Wind tore at branches, bending trees until they groaned and snapped. Sheets of rain blew sideways, reducing visibility to mere feet. The mud sucked at their boots, threatening to pull them down, but they pressed on, each step deliberate. They knew the jungle well enough to move silently, even under such punishing conditions. But silence meant nothing if the enemy was already waiting. Another flash of lightning split the sky. In that brief illumination, the men saw the guard towers, silhouettes against the rain. No movement, no light strange. The compound looked almost abandoned, and yet intelligence reports had been certain. The commander frowned, but gave no signal to retreat. The storm was perfect cover, but it also concealed truths. In war, things were rarely as they appeared. The men crept closer, forming a line along the tree line. From here, they had a clear view of the outer wall, slick with water, glistening in the storm. The commander raised a hand to signal the breacher forward. The man moved, carrying his gear with careful precision, preparing to plant charges that would open a path inside. The others tightened their grips on their rifles, eyes sweeping the darkness for the smallest sign of movement. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The storm swallowed everything, the pounding rain, the rolling thunder, the flashes of light that turned the world into fleeting snapshots. The men waited, nerves taut but controlled. They had done this before, countless times in training and in combat. Still, every mission carried its own weight, its own unseen dangers. Tonight, the storm was their ally, but storms could shift in an instant. The commander's mind raced, even as his face remained calm. He had been in enough firefights to know that silence was rarely safety. The compound was too still, too quiet beneath the roar of the storm. He studied the towers again, searching for shapes that didn't belong, shadows that moved against the rain. Nothing, yet instinct gnawed at him. Something was waiting. He tapped his radio, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Stay sharp. Something's off." The men acknowledged with brief clicks of their radios. No words, just confirmation. Their eyes never stopped moving, rifles steady, fingers brushing against triggers. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, the boom of thunder immediate and violent. In that searing instant of white light, one of the SEALs thought he saw movement along the wall. Just a flicker, too fast to confirm. He shifted his aim, peering into the darkness, but the rain blurred everything. The commander caught the change and signaled for the man to hold position. Every second stretched. The breacher reached the wall, planting his charges with hands steady despite the storm. Explosives in place, he gave the signal and backed away, water pouring from his helmet, mud caking his uniform. The team braced, rifles raised, eyes locked on the wall. The commander nodded. The storm covered the muffled thump of the detonation. A hole blew open in the wall, jagged edges crumbling under the downpour. The SEALs moved instantly, pouring through the breach with the speed of shadows. Boots splashed in puddles. Rifles tracked every corner, every doorway. Inside the compound, the storm was just as fierce, bouncing off concrete and corrugated roofs, drowning out the sound of their advance. Still no guards. No resistance. The silence was louder than the storm. The commander's unease deepened. He felt the mission slipping from the neat lines of strategy into the chaos of uncertainty. His team advanced with discipline, sweeping every room, every corner, but the compound felt abandoned. Empty crates, overturned chairs, half-burned fires. It was as if someone had been here and left in a hurry. Or worse, as if someone was still here waiting. The storm intensified, hammering the compound with sheets of rain. Lightning flashed again, casting twisted shadows across walls. The SEALs spread out, rifles covering every angle. The commander keyed his radio. "Report." One by one, voices whispered back. "Clear, clear, clear." Then came the pause that told him the worst. The last man didn't answer. The storm roared louder, drowning the silence that followed. The compound felt wrong. Every step inside the walls only deepened the unease gnawing at the SEAL commander's gut. Rainwater streamed off the corrugated roofs, pooling in cracked concrete, but there was no movement. No guards, no voices, no sign of the target. It was too empty, too still. The SEALs moved with professional precision, clearing buildings one after another. Their boots splashed quietly through puddles as they advanced, rifles steady, eyes sharp. Each whispered report came back the same, clear. But the emptiness was a trap in itself. It was as if the enemy had melted into the storm, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Lightning seared across the sky, throwing the compound into a sudden, stark relief. For an instant, every corner, every doorway lit up in blinding white. The commander caught a flicker of movement, too deliberate, too sharp to be the storm. He opened his mouth to issue a warning, but the jungle itself seemed to explode before the words left his throat. Gunfire erupted, deafening and brutal. The first rounds tore into the compound from the tree line, tracer fire streaking through the rain like glowing spears. Bullets chewed into walls, sprayed concrete, and sent sparks skittering across the ground. The SEALs dropped instantly, instincts overriding thought, returning fire even as they scrambled for cover. The storm had masked the enemy's approach. Dozens of fighters opened up from concealed positions, rifles chattering in synchronized bursts. Their muzzles flared like lightning, blending with the storm's fury. The jungle had swallowed them whole until the moment of attack, and now it vomited them forth in an unrelenting wave of fire. Contact! Contact! The seal point man shouted, his voice drowned beneath thunder and gunfire. The commander barked orders, his voice calm despite the chaos. Cover fire. Move to hard cover go. Go, go. The seals scattered with surgical efficiency, sliding behind overturned crates, low walls, and the jagged breach they had blown minutes earlier. Their rifles barked back, controlled bursts slicing through the rain. Muzzle flashes lit the night, fleeting and furious. The storm turned the firefight into a blur rain mixing with smoke, lightning blinding eyes already strained by adrenaline. Enemy fighters advanced, silhouettes darting between trees, using the storm as their shield. For every one that fell, two more seemed to appear. The seals were outnumbered badly, and the jungle itself seemed to spit enemies from every shadow. Rounds slammed into the walls around them, one grazing close enough to spray shards of concrete across the commander's face. He barely flinched, snapping off a shot that dropped a figure charging through the rain. "Hold your ground," he roared, his voice steady. A grenade arced over the compound wall, clattering across the wet concrete. One of the seals lunged, scooping it up and hurling it back over the wall. It detonated mid-air, showering the area in smoke and fire. The shockwave rattled their bones, the storm swallowing the explosion almost as soon as it came. The firefight was relentless, minutes stretching into eternity. The seals moved like a machine, each man covering the next, shifting positions with practiced rhythm. But for every burst they fired, the enemy answered with overwhelming volume. Rainwater mixed with blood on the ground. One seal went down with a cry, clutching his shoulder, his rifle skidding across the slick concrete. His teammate dragged him back, lit sparking inches away. The wounded man gritted his teeth, refusing to scream again, his free hand still reaching for a sidearm. Suppressive fire, the commander ordered. 3 rifles unleashed in unison, carving holes through the tree line. For a moment, the enemy fell back, silhouettes stumbling into the shadows. Then, just as suddenly, they returned, fiercer than before. "Out of ammo," one seal shouted, voice raw. The words cut deeper than the storm, deeper than the bullets. Another echoed the same desperate cry, magazine spent, weapons useless. The team had burned through their supplies faster than expected, the ambush stretching longer, fiercer, more relentless than any briefing had prepared them for. The commander's heart sank, though his face never showed it. Ammunition was life. Without it, even the strongest fighters were just targets. Thunder boomed overhead, lightning splitting the sky, revealing for a split second the sheer scale of their predicament. Dozens of enemy fighters circled the compound, rifles raised, eyes gleaming with the confidence of predators, closing in on wounded prey. The seals pressed on, switching to sidearms, hurling smoke grenades, doing anything to buy seconds. But seconds were all they had left. "Hold the line," the commander shouted, his voice more command than hope. Knives were drawn. Pistols barked their last rounds. Every man fought not for victory, but for survival. The storm, once their cover, had become their coffin. The compound walls echoed with the clash of metal, the cries of men, and the endless roar of the storm. Then, amid the chaos, something changed. The enemy's fire slowed. A hesitation rippled through their ranks, their advance faltering. One man, hidden in the shadows of the ridge beyond the compound, had shifted the balance. From her prone position, unseen by anyone, the sniper watched the battlefield unfold through her rain-smeared scope. She saw the seals running dry, saw the enemy's confidence grow, saw the line between survival and annihilation narrowing to nothing. Her orders had been clear: remain in overwatch unless absolutely necessary. But what she saw below left no room for hesitation. Her breath steadied. Her finger found the trigger. Through the storm, she picked her first target. The firefight had stretched into a nightmare. Minutes felt like hours, each second measured in muzzle flashes and the hiss of bullets slicing through rain. The SEALs were still alive, still fighting, but the storm no longer felt like an ally. It drowned their senses, soaked their weapons, and blurred the line between survival and slaughter. The commander crouched low behind a crumbling wall, water streaming down his face, rifle pressed tight to his shoulder. His magazines lay spent at his side, brass casings scattered in the mud around his boots. He reloaded with practiced precision, but the movements were slower now, deliberate, careful, because he knew the truth. They were running out. "Cover me," shouted the breacher, his voice raw. The commander rose, firing 3 controlled bursts into the tree line. Shapes moved in the shadows, and he cut one down, the body tumbling into the mud. The breacher dashed across the courtyard, dragging a wounded teammate to cover. A round struck the concrete inches from his head, sending chips spraying, but he didn't falter. He threw the wounded man down beside another SEAL, then slid in next to him, panting. "I'm dry," he shouted, slamming his last empty magazine onto the ground. The words spread like poison. Another voice cut through the storm. "Out of ammo." And then another. The commander clenched his jaw, forcing his face to remain calm even as his gut twisted. He couldn't let them see the fear, couldn't let them feel the despair creeping in. But he knew that once the bullets stopped, they were done. "Switch to sidearms. Make every shot count," he ordered, his tone flat, commanding. Pistols barked in the rain, their smaller muzzles flashing in the storm. Knives glinted as men pulled them free, gripping steel like it was their last anchor to survival. They fired and fought with everything left, conserving every round like gold. Each pull of the trigger was weighed, measured, aimed not at victory, but at buying another second of life. The enemy pressed harder, emboldened by the SEALs' weakening fire. They shouted in their own tongue, voices rising in confidence, rifles pouring lead into the compound. The air stank of wet earth, gunpowder, and blood. One SEAL, the youngest of the team, slammed his pistol back into its holster with a snarl. "Empty," he yelled, grabbing his combat knife. He crouched low, rain dripping from his helmet, waiting for the inevitable moment when the enemy would come through the breach. His hands shook, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that this was what he had trained for, and yet what no one ever wanted. The commander glanced at him, pride burning even in despair. "You hold that knife like it's a rifle," he said sharply. "Understood?" "Yes, sir." The younger man barked back, forcing steadiness into his voice. A burst of enemy fire ripped into the wall above them, spraying dust and water. The commander ducked, then popped back up, squeezing off the last of his rounds. His rifle clicked empty, the hollow sound echoing louder in his ears than the thunder itself. He ejected the magazine and stared at it for half a second, knowing there were no more. He slung the rifle across his back, drew his pistol, and checked the chamber. 1 magazine. 15 rounds. That was it. "Make them think we've got more than we do," he growled into his radio. "Fire smart. Fire loud." The SEALs complied, staggering their shots, making noise, making presence. But the truth hung heavy. The compound was turning into a tomb. The rain poured harder, if that was even possible, sheets of water hammering down. Lightning split the sky again, and for an instant the commander saw them, dozens of enemy fighters circling, tightening the noose. Their rifles gleamed, their faces hard with certainty. They knew the SEALs were trapped. They knew time was on their side. The wounded seal groaned, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, washed away by the rain, diluted but constant. "We're not going to make it, are we?" he muttered. The commander crouched beside him, pressing a hand over the wound. "We'll make it," he said firmly, though the lie burned his throat. "We always make it." Another SEAL fired his last pistol round, then hurled the empty weapon aside. He pulled his knife, blade gleaming in the lightning. "They want us?" He spat. "They'll have to bleed for it." The enemy pressed closer, muzzle flashes sparking in the storm. The SEALs ducked, returning what little fire they could. Bullets whined overhead, sparking against concrete, tearing into mud. Last mag. One man shouted, "Empty here." Another cried. The commander's pistol barked again, each shot placed with cold precision. 2 enemies dropped, thrashing in the mud. His magazine thinned with terrifying speed, 10 rounds left, then 9, then 8. And then the worst moment came. Click. The sound cut through him like a blade. Empty. He stared at the weapon, felt the cold weight of finality, then shoved it back into its holster. He pulled his knife free, gripping the handle tight. Around him, his men did the same. Their faces were grim, resolute. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were warriors standing at the edge of death. The storm raged above, lightning flaring, thunder shaking the ground. The enemy shouted louder, voices filled with triumph as they closed in. They fired less now, conserving ammunition for the final assault. They knew the SEALs had nothing left. The commander stood, knife in hand, eyes locked on the breach. He felt the weight of responsibility, the crushing knowledge that his men's lives hung on the edge of impossible odds. He breathed once deeply, rain filling his lungs. "Brothers," he said, his voice steady despite everything, "we don't back down. Not tonight. Not ever." The men straightened, knives and pistols ready, even if they had no rounds. Their bodies ached, lungs burned, but their eyes burned brighter. The enemy surged. Bullets tore into the compound again, but now figures moved through the breach, rifles raised, bayonets glinting. The SEALs braced, hearts pounding, knives tight in their grips. The commander roared. A primal sound ripped from his chest, and the SEALs answered as one. The storm itself seemed to shudder at their defiance. And then a shot cracked through the night. Not theirs. Not the enemy's. One clean, precise, impossible shot. It cut through thunder, through rain, through chaos. An enemy fighter crumpled mid-step, lifeless before he hit the mud. His comrades froze, confusion rippling like shock through their ranks. The SEALs blinked, stunned, then looked up toward the ridge. Somewhere in the darkness, invisible to all but the storm, someone was watching. Someone had just turned despair into possibility. High on the ridge, beyond the compound's broken walls, she lay still. Rain poured down in unbroken sheets, soaking her ghillie suit until it clung to her body like a second skin. Mud caked her elbows, her chest, her legs, blending her into the earth itself. To the untrained eye, she wasn't there at all. Just another patch of dirt, another twisted shape in the jungle's chaos. Her cheek pressed firmly against the stock of her rifle, the scope steady despite the storm. Through the lens, the battlefield unfolded below. Every movement, every flicker of muzzle flash, every shadowed figure stood sharp in her glass. The SEALs fought like lions in a cage, cornered, defiant, desperate. She could hear their shouts through the thunder, faint but distinct over the comms channel she shared with them. She had been placed here as Overwatch, her mission clear, cover the team if needed. Otherwise, remain unseen. Unfired rounds were a success. A sniper's worth wasn't measured in body counts, but in control, patience, restraint. Every shot had to matter. Every shot had to change something. And yet, as she watched, her hands remained still, even though her heart pounded. She had trained herself to slow her pulse, to breathe with the rhythm of the earth, but her body betrayed her now. Because what she saw below was not strategy, it was survival unraveling. She tracked the SEAL commander through her scope. He moved with the calm precision of experience, rallying his men, holding the line even as they screamed about empty magazines. His face betrayed nothing, but she recognized the truth. She had seen it before. The set jaw, the measured words, the eyes that burned with defiance, even as they acknowledged the inevitable. He was preparing to die on his feet. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, not yet pulling, not yet ready. A sniper didn't rush. She studied the enemy, their movement, their confidence. They were circling tighter now, muzzles gleaming in the lightning, their victory almost certain. They fired less, not because they were cautious, but because they knew the SEALs had little left to give. She exhaled slowly. Her scope shifted to the breach, to the first enemy who dared step forward. She could see the smirk on his face, the triumph in his eyes. He raised his rifle, bayonet glinting, ready to plunge into the chaos. Her reticle settled on his chest. She squeezed. The suppressed crack of her rifle was almost invisible in the storm. One sharp whisper lost to thunder. But the effect was instant. The man crumpled mid-step, lifeless before he hit the mud. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. They froze, glancing around, rifles twitching, searching for the source of the invisible strike. The SEALs blinked, stunned by the sudden, impossible lifeline. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even blink. Her scope was already shifting. Another target machine gunner dug into a position on the compound wall, pouring lead into the SEAL's cover. Her reticle settled on his head, his helmet gleaming under lightning. She squeezed again. The rifle whispered, and the man slumped forward, his weapon silenced. The battlefield shifted. The SEALs moved with renewed life, seizing the second of reprieve her shots had bought. Pistols barked, knives flashed, and their formation tightened. The commander shouted orders, his voice firm again, no longer buried in despair. She remained invisible. That was her power. She was the unseen hand, the ghost in the storm. Her body was motionless, but her mind raced. She calculated wind, though, in this storm. It was unpredictable. She measured distance, accounted for rain, compensated for lightning that blinded her scope. Every shot had to thread the needle of chaos. There was no margin for error. Her cums crackled faintly in her ear. A SEAL's voice, low but edged with awe. "Someone's up there." The commander's voice followed, clipped, controlled. "Don't question it. Use it." She smiled faintly, though it never reached her eyes. They didn't need to know who she was. Not now. They just needed to live. Another enemy appeared, crouching low, flanking the compound's north wall. He thought he was unseen. She tracked him for 3 breaths, her finger tightening, then fired. The round struck his thigh, spinning him into the mud. He screamed, and the sound carried even through the storm. His comrades faltered again, their advance slowing. Fear, that was her weapon. Not bullets, not steel. Fear of the unseen, the unknown. One hidden shot carried the weight of an army when the enemy didn't know where it came from. Her scope swept back to the SEALs. They were still pinned, still bleeding, but they weren't broken anymore. She could see it in their movement, in the way they stood straighter, in the fire rekindled in their eyes. They believed again. They believed because she had reminded them they weren't alone. The storm raged, indifferent to the lives below, but for her, it was an ally. It masked the sharp crack of her rifle, hid the faint trail of her muzzle flash, cloaked her in darkness. Every time lightning flared, she froze, knowing visibility cut both ways. When it faded, she exhaled, adjusted, and prepared her next strike. Her body ached. Hours of lying prone in rain-soaked mud tested endurance as much as precision. Her fingers were numb, her shoulders stiff, but she ignored it all. Discipline was her strength, and discipline meant denying pain. She paused only once, lifting her eyes from the scope to the storm itself. She saw the compound below, the seals battered but fighting, the enemy still circling. She knew the battle was far from won. But she also knew she had turned the tide. Her radio clicked faintly. The commander's voice, calm and commanding even through static. "Whoever you are, keep doing God's work." She didn't reply. Words weren't her weapon. She pulled her focus back into the scope, breathing slow, fingers steady. There were more targets. More enemies who thought they had the upper hand. Not tonight. Not while she was watching. The battlefield had slowed to a brutal rhythm: fire, thunder, lightning, rain, screams. The seals clung to life in the compound, their knives and pistols almost useless against the storm of rifles closing in. Yet somehow they were still standing. And above them, unseen, the sniper watched. Her scope swept the chaos. The enemy pressed forward in waves, but something about them told her they weren't just fighting, they were following. Her reticle tracked the one man who never fired, who only gestured with sharp, practiced signals. He barked orders between bursts of thunder, his men obeying without question. The squad leader. She slowed her breathing, her body going still as stone. In the world of the sniper, there was no rain, no thunder, no storm, only the target. She read the angle, gauged the distance, accounted for the way the wind shifted the rain sideways across her scope. Her crosshairs hovered just above his sternum. She knew the physics by heart. 1 pound of pressure on the trigger. Exhale, hold, squeeze. The storm gave her cover. Lightning flared, thunder rolled, and she fired. The round cut through the storm like judgment. The man jerked backward, arms flailing, his voice cut off mid-command. His body collapsed into the mud, lifeless, before his men even realized what had happened. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. The fighters around him stopped shooting. Their confidence cracked, uncertainty slicing through their ranks. They glanced at one another, searching the storm for answers. Where had the shot come from? Who had struck down their leader with such precision, in such chaos? The SEAL commander recognized the moment instantly. He surged to his feet, pistol raised, voice booming with authority. "Push back! They're breaking!" The SEALs responded like lightning. Their fatigue vanished, their despair burned away. Knives slashed, pistols barked, wounded men found strength they didn't know they had. For the first time in the battle, the enemy stumbled. The sniper didn't stop. She tracked the chaos, her reticle finding another target, a machine gunner swinging his weapon toward the commander. She squeezed again. The man's head snapped back, and the heavy weapon fell silent. 2 shots. 2 lives taken. 2 ripples of chaos. The enemy began shouting, their formations breaking. Some dove for cover, others fired blindly into the storm, bullets spraying wildly into shadows. Fear gripped them, not of the SEALs, but of the unseen phantom on the ridge. The SEALs didn't need to know her name, her rank, or even where she was. All they needed to know was that death itself was on their side. One SEAL, his pistol empty, crouched low behind a wall. He glanced at the commander, eyes wide. "Who the hell is that?" The commander reloaded his pistol with his last magazine, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Doesn't matter," he said. "She's ours." The sniper shifted her scope again, rain dripping into her eye but ignored. Her target, a fighter crawling along the compound wall, grenade clutched in hand. She squeezed, and the man collapsed, the grenade rolling harmlessly into the mud. Each shot was precise, calculated, devastating. She wasn't spraying bullets. She was reshaping the battlefield, one round at a time. Her rifle whispered like a ghost, the storm swallowing every trace of her presence. For the SEALs, it was as if the storm itself had turned against their enemies. Each time they thought they were finished, a shot cracked, and death claimed another attacker. The hopelessness that had weighed on them minutes before was gone. Now they fought with fury, emboldened by the unseen ally above them. The enemy leader's body still lay in the mud, his eyes staring blankly at the storm he would never command again. His men hesitated, their confidence shattered. The chain of command had broken. In chaos, hesitation was death. And tonight, hesitation belonged to them. The SEAL commander seized the moment. Regroup. He barked. His men fell into formation, even the wounded dragging themselves into the fight. They fired what few rounds they had left with renewed purpose, every bullet cutting through hesitation. The sniper stayed on them, covering every movement. When an enemy tried to flank, she dropped him. When one raised a rocket launcher, she fired first, cutting him down before he could even aim. Her shots weren't random, they were surgical. She wasn't just killing. She was orchestrating. The storm was her symphony. The rifle, her instrument. The battlefield, her stage. Below, the SEALs surged, knives slashing, pistols cracking. Their movements synchronized again, not the desperate flailing of men running dry, but the disciplined ferocity of warriors who had found hope in the shadows. The enemy began to retreat. At first, just a few hesitant steps backward, glances toward the ridge, whispers of fear. Then more. Then, all at once, the tide turned. The fighters who had stormed the compound with confidence now fell back, dragging their wounded, shouting in confusion. They fired sporadically, but the shots were aimless, panicked. The commander raised his pistol, firing his last round into the night, the shot echoing like victory. That's right. He roared. Run! The SEALs echoed his cry, their voices carrying through the storm. They weren't saved, not by a long shot, but for the first time, the enemy was on the defensive. And at the heart of it all was one hidden shot. The sniper adjusted her scope, exhaled, and allowed herself a single thought, not pride, not relief. In the chaos of war, sometimes survival didn't come from numbers or from firepower. Sometimes it came from patience, from one pull of a trigger, from one hidden shot in the storm. She blinked, wiped rain from her eye, and refocused. The battle wasn't over. Not yet, but it had changed. And she had made a change. The compound reeked of smoke, blood, and rain-soaked mud. Spent shell casings littered the ground, glinting under flashes of lightning like broken teeth. Moments earlier, the SEALs had stood on the brink of annihilation, pistols shaking in their hands, knives ready for the final stand. Now, against every law of combat, they stood straighter. Their eyes burned again. Because someone was out there. Because death had found the enemy before it had found them. The sniper's unseen shots had carved space for them to breathe. And in that breath, the SEAL commander found opportunity. Form up. He barked, voice cutting through the storm. His men obeyed without hesitation. Wounded were pulled into cover, those with blades positioned at choke points, and anyone with a round left in their chamber prepared to fire. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He had fought in deserts, in cities, in seas that swallowed men whole, but this night felt different. Survival had been slipping away, and then, in the span of heartbeats, it had been clawed back. Whoever she was, the phantom on the ridge, she had reminded him of an old truth. A single act of precision could tilt the balance of a war. The enemy, meanwhile, faltered. Their leader's body still lay in the mud, eyes wide, mouth agape in a silent order never finished. His men whispered among themselves, gesturing nervously toward the ridge. Some pointed rifles at shadows, firing blindly into the storm. Each wasted bullet was a confession. They were rattled. The sniper didn't pause. Her scope found a fighter rushing with a grenade, intent on ending the standoff in one devastating throw. She squeezed, and the man collapsed mid-stride, the explosive rolling harmlessly from his grip. The grenade detonated in the mud, blinding lightning within lightning, throwing his comrades back in panic. The SEAL commander seized the opening. "Advance by twos!" He roared. "Push them!" The team moved in pairs, covering one another with blades and what little ammunition remained. They advanced through rubble and smoke, their movements sharp, calculated. Each step forward was earned in blood, but each step forward was theirs. The sniper tracked their progress with a steady eye. Every time the enemy tried to regroup, she struck. A marksman who rose too high dropped. A fighter who aimed a rocket tube dropped. Her bullets didn't just kill. They sculpted the battlefield, carving corridors for the SEALs to move through. The storm was merciless, rain hammering down in sheets, wind howling like a beast unleashed. But for the SEALs, it became an ally. Every thunderclap masked their movement. Every flash of lightning disoriented their enemy. And above it all, the phantom rifle whispered judgment. One SEAL, his arm bleeding heavily, glanced up through the rain. "Whoever she is," he muttered, half to himself, "she's the reason we're still breathing." The commander heard him but didn't reply. He couldn't afford to turn sentiment into distraction. Gratitude could wait. Survival could not. The enemy began to pull back, slowly at first, then with urgency. They dragged their wounded, their formation sloppy, cohesion gone. Fear ate at them, and fear killed faster than bullets. Still, the battle wasn't finished. A desperate enemy could be more dangerous than a confident one. And as the SEALs pressed forward, the commander knew the retreat could be a trap. He raised his hand, signaling a halt. The team crouched low behind shattered walls and overturned crates, breathing hard, knives dripping with rain and blood. The compound was theirs for the moment, but beyond its walls, the storm hid shadows. He tapped his comms, voice low but firm. "Overwatch, if you can hear me, we're holding. Talk to me." Static. Nothing. The sniper heard the words, though she didn't answer. She couldn't. Her position had to remain secret. Silence was her shield. So instead of words, she gave him another gift. Her scope found an enemy sniper crawling into position across the ridge. She squeezed, and the man's rifle clattered from his lifeless hands. The commander heard the distant thud, saw the body slump, and allowed himself the faintest smile. That was her answer. The SEALs regrouped, counting what they had left. It wasn't much. One had a single round in his pistol. Another clutched only a knife, knuckles white around the hilt. Two were badly wounded, but refused to stop moving. But they weren't broken anymore. And that was enough. The commander studied the battlefield. The enemy had thinned, but hadn't vanished. They lingered at the tree line, moving in nervous clusters, shouting orders that no longer carried authority. He knew what they were deciding, whether to press again or vanish into the storm. The sniper's eye never left her scope. Her body ached, soaked to the bone, but she endured. This was the moment patience demanded, when the enemy teetered between resolve and collapse. A single mistake could reset the battle. A single shot could end it. Her reticle drifted to the tree line. There a figure rallying the fighters, waving his rifle, shouting with false courage. She exhaled, squeezed, and he dropped. Another leader silenced. Another ripple of panic. The SEAL commander saw it happen, though he couldn't see her. He didn't need to. "That's it," he growled, voice sharp as a blade. "They're finished." His men pushed forward again, knives and fists now as dangerous as bullets. The storm swallowed their shouts, but the enemy heard enough. Their line broke. They scattered into the trees, leaving bodies and weapons behind. The SEALs stood at the compound's edge, chests heaving, blades dripping, faces streaked with mud and rain. They didn't cheer. They didn't relax. Warriors knew better. Survival was not victory. Survival was just another chance to keep fighting. And above them, on the ridge, the sniper finally lowered her rifle. Her eyes burned, her body screamed, but her discipline held. She had done her part. She had been the shadow that shifted the tide. Yet as she scanned the tree line one last time, she saw movement, a shadow larger than the rest, a force that hadn't yet revealed itself. The battle wasn't over. Not truly. She steadied her rifle again, whispering to herself the words she had lived by since the beginning. One shot at a time. One breath at a time. The storm howled, but in her world there was only silence. The turning point had come. The endgame waited in the shadows. The compound lay in ruin, a skeleton of shattered walls and smoking debris. The SEALs stood in its broken heart, battered but alive, their breaths ragged, their blades slick. They had done the impossible, forced back an enemy that should have buried them. But in war, victory was never that simple. The commander felt it first. A weight in the air, heavier than the storm, thicker than the rain. He had lived long enough in battlefields to know when silence was a lie. The enemy hadn't gone. They had pulled back. They were watching, waiting. His jaw tightened. "Stay sharp. This isn't over." The men shifted uneasily, blades ready, pistols clutched with empty chambers. The silence pressed against them, broken only by thunder. Somewhere in the distance, the storm groaned like an omen. And then it came. The tree line erupted with fire. Automatic rifles lit the night in staccato flashes, and rockets streaked toward the compound, slamming into what little cover remained. The ground shook, spraying mud and stone into the air. The SEALs hit the dirt, shielding their wounded. "Incoming!" Someone shouted, though the warning was drowned in the storm. The final gambit had begun. The enemy wasn't retreating after all. They were committing. All of them. It was an all-or-nothing surge. A desperate attempt to crush the Americans before dawn could expose the battle to the world. Dozens of fighters stormed the compound at once, screaming through the storm, their rage matched only by their fear of the unseen phantom above. The commander shouted orders over the chaos. "Hold the line. Don't give them ground." Knives met rifles in close quarters. Pistols cracked dry until hammers fell on empty chambers. Mud became a killing floor, slick with rain and blood. Every SEAL fought with the ferocity of a man who knew there was nowhere left to run. Above them, the sniper adjusted her scope. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She had expected this. She had waited for it. The enemy had regrouped, but desperation was as predictable as pride. Her crosshairs settled on a fighter charging with a rocket tube. She squeezed, and he fell, his weapon firing wild into the sky before exploding harmlessly in the trees. Another target, a heavy gunner, laying down suppressive fire. One breath, one squeeze, and he dropped, his weapon going silent. She was fast now, faster than before, shifting targets in rhythm with the battle below. Each shot was a lifeline, each kill another second bought for the SEALs. But they were coming in waves, more than she could count, more than she could cut down alone. The commander fought like a storm himself, his knife slashing in brutal arcs, his pistol used as a club when rounds ran dry. He knew the truth. They were seconds away from collapse. But if seconds were all they had, then seconds were all they needed. He shouted through the storm, "Phantom, we need you now." The sniper didn't answer. She couldn't. Words wasted breath, wasted focus. Instead, she shifted her scope to the tree line again. There another figure, taller than the rest, moving with authority. Not a leader giving orders this time, but something worse, a commander of reinforcements. If he survived, the battle would reset. The SEALs would be overrun. Her breath slowed. Rain stung her face. Lightning blinded her vision, but she focused. One shot, one chance. She steadied, ignoring the chaos, the screams, the thunder. The crosshairs drifted, settled, held. She squeezed. The bullet cut through the storm. The man jerked violently, collapsing into the mud, his men around him faltering in shock. For a moment, the charge hesitated. The SEALs seized it. A wounded operator lunged forward, knife driving into an attacker's chest. Another slammed a rifle butt into a skull, dropping the man instantly. The commander roared like thunder itself, rallying his team with pure force of will. The battlefield became a maelstrom. Men grappled in the mud, blades flashing, fists pounding. The storm swallowed gunfire, replacing it with the sound of steel on flesh, the grunt of survival. The sniper never stopped. She picked off stragglers, suppressed flanking attempts, cut down those who dared raise weapons toward the compound. But fatigue gnawed at her. Her muscles screamed, her eyes blurred. Hours of stillness in the rain had left her body numb, her trigger finger trembling. And then the worst sound a sniper could hear. Click. Her rifle jammed. For a heartbeat, panic threatened her discipline. She pulled back, ejecting the round, clearing the chamber with movements she had drilled 1,000 times. But every second without her was another second the SEALs bled. She forced herself calm. Discipline over fear. She chambered another round, raised the scope, and returned to the fight. Below, the commander felt his strength waning. His knife dripped crimson, his chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him through deserts and seas. He caught the eyes of his men, one by one. No words passed, but they understood. They would hold until the last. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the battlefield in brutal clarity. For a second, every face, every weapon, every wound was visible. And in that frozen tableau, the sniper saw the truth. This wasn't just a battle. This was the fulcrum of survival. Her scope landed on the last heavy threat. A fighter sprinting through the rain, belt of grenades strapped across his chest, suicide written in his eyes. Her reticle hovered. Her finger pressed. Crack. The man fell forward, grenades detonating in a fireball that consumed 3 of his comrades. The shockwave rocked the field, throwing mud and bodies into the air. Silence followed. Not peace silence, the kind that comes when even war holds its breath. The enemy broke. Their courage shattered in an instant, their will gone. They fled into the trees, dragging whoever could still move, leaving the dead and dying in the mud. The SEALs stood among the wreckage, battered but alive, their eyes wide in disbelief. They had survived the final gambit. The commander straightened, chest heaving, blade still in hand. He looked toward the ridge, rain streaming down his face. He didn't know who she was, not yet, but he knew what she had done. She had given them a miracle, and miracles in war were written in blood. The storm broke with the first light of dawn. The jungle, once a roaring ocean of wind and rain, fell into uneasy silence. The sky shifted from black to bruised purple, and the clouds cracked apart, bleeding pale sunlight onto the wreckage below. Smoke rose from the compound in thin, bitter trails. The mud was thick with blood, the earth scarred by explosions. The seals stood among it, exhausted specters of the men who had entered the night. Their knives hung limp at their sides, their pistols empty, their bodies bent under the weight of wounds. Yet their eyes were open. They were breathing. Against every law of numbers, they had lived. The commander leaned against the shattered wall, chest heaving. His uniform clung to him in tatters, streaked with mud and blood, but his gaze was steady. He had seen victories before, and he had seen losses. This was something else. Survival didn't feel like triumph. It felt like theft life stolen from death at the last possible moment. Around him, his men moved in silence, tending to the wounded, gathering what little remained of their gear. No one spoke of what had happened. Words felt small in the face of the night they had endured. And yet, every man's eyes turned, inevitably, to the ridge. They all knew. Without her, they would be corpses cooling in the mud. Without her, their knives would have been the last desperate gesture of doomed men. She was the ghost who had cut death's hand before it could close around them. The commander broke the silence. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "We owe her." As if on cue, a figure appeared at the crest of the ridge. She moved slowly, carefully, as though the night's strain weighed on her shoulders. Her rifle was slung across her chest, the barrel caked in mud and rain. Her ghillie suit dripped water, the camouflage shredded and torn from hours of crawling through the storm. To the seals below, she looked less like a soldier, and more like the storm itself made, flesh something that had risen from the earth to strike and then vanish. But she didn't vanish. Not this time. She descended the slope, step by step, until she reached the edge of the compound. The seals parted instinctively, not out of command, but out of reverence. The commander met her eyes for the first time. They were steady, sharp, but weary. She was younger than he expected, her face hardened by experience, but not yet carved into stone by age. Her hands, though trembling from exhaustion, still clutched the rifle with the surety of discipline. He nodded once. A soldier's acknowledgement. Nothing more was needed. But one of his men, his arm bound in makeshift bandages, couldn't hold back. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't answer immediately. She let her gaze drift over the battlefield, the bodies, the wreckage, the lives spared. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost lost to the fading storm. Someone who was sent to watch, to cover you if the storm turned. The seal raised a brow. "Cover us? You saved us." She shook her head. "No, you saved yourselves. I just made sure you had the chance." The commander studied her in silence, then stepped forward. He extended his hand. "Doesn't matter who sent you. Doesn't matter why. You were there when it counted." For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't used to being seen, to being pulled from the shadows. Her work was silence, her victories invisible. But then, slowly, she clasped his hand. It wasn't gratitude that passed between them. It was recognition. Two warriors who understood that survival was never an accident. The sun climbed higher, burning mist from the jungle. Birds returned to the air, their calls piercing the silence like a song of defiance. Life, stubborn and unyielding, reclaimed what war had tried to consume. The seals began to prepare for extraction. Radios crackled faintly as they reached for a signal, coordinates relayed with voices hoarse from battle. The commander directed with quiet efficiency, his men moving with the calm precision of survivors who knew the fight was over. The sniper remained on the edge of the compound, her rifle across her knees. She didn't join their circle, didn't speak further. She simply watched the tree line, as though expecting the storm to rise again. The commander approached once more, standing beside her in the mud. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then he asked softly, "You lost anyone tonight?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't look at him, only at the jungle. "Everyone loses someone. That's why we fight." He nodded, understanding more than her words revealed. He looked at his men, at the faces that had almost been gone, and then back at her. "Whatever your orders were, they're finished now. You bought us dawn." That's more than anyone could ask. For the first time, her lips curved in the faintest smile. Not joy, not relief, just acknowledgement. The kind of smile soldiers share when they know they'll carry the same night in their bones forever. The extraction came hours later, rotor blades cutting through the morning sky, the wash scattering leaves and ash across the compound. The SEALs loaded their wounded, steadying one another with wordless hands. The commander boarded last, turning back once toward the ridge. The sniper stood there again, watching. She hadn't moved aboard, hadn't made a sound. He raised a hand, 2 fingers to his temple, a soldier's salute. She returned it with the smallest nod. Then, as the helicopter lifted into the sky, she turned back toward the jungle, vanishing into the green as though she had never been there at all. The SEALs would speak of that night in whispers, a story told in fragments, each man remembering it differently. Some would say she was an angel, others a ghost, but all of them would remember the truth. When their last round was spent, and death had circled in the storm, it was her hidden shot that had cut the darkness open. And though dawn had come, its light carried shadows. Shadows of the night when a sniper, unseen and unyielding, wrote a story in silence, one that would never be forgotten.